Welcome to Surviving Roots, the podcast where we navigate the messy, beautiful work of healing and growth. I'm your host, Cari Fund, and this is your space to breathe, reflect, and find strength. Whether you're breaking free from old patterns, healing from loss, or rebuilding your story one small step at a time, you're in the right place. So take a deep breath, give yourself this time, and let's uncover the tools to move forward with courage. This podcast is for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Surviving Roots and to my very first solo episode. I can't believe I'm doing this. It feels a little surreal sitting here, I have to admit, just me and this mic, but this feels like the perfect way to reflect and connect with all of you as we move into February. It's my birthday month, y'all. I'm going to be the big 4-7. For those of you who don't know, I was born on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Ironic, right? A day dedicated to love, yet for so much of my life, I didn't know what self-love was. I didn't know how to love myself. It wasn't until my 30s that I truly began to understand what it meant to turn inward, to give myself the care, the compassion, and the grace that I had always searched for, in the world and in others. For anyone who's ever looked at their life and thought, this can't be it, let me tell you, it doesn't have to be. We don't have to live by our circumstances. We can change everything with our choices. I firmly believe that life stamps grit in our bones, darkness into our light, and demands that we walk through hell sometimes just to find out what's already inside of us. Power. Yes, power. And what if I told you that everything you need to create the life that you've always dreamed of, that you want for yourself, is already within you, waiting for you to believe in yourself? Here's the truth. The hardest choices in life are rarely the easiest ones to make, but they are the ones that lead to our healing, our growth, and our freedom. You know, I grew up in what looked like an ideal life on the outside. I had a nice house, we had nice cars, and the kind of privilege, money can buy. But inside, my world was lonely. My family was broken. My parents divorced when I was very young. I lived with my single mother and a single mother household until the age of 14, where my mom was physically present, but emotionally completely unavailable. Then I moved into my father's home, probably around the age of 14, and my dad was too busy with his social life and drinking. He was an alcoholic. He was too busy to be a parent. And there I found myself yet alone again. I never had the love and guidance or direction from my parents growing up. Just extremely high expectations placed upon me by people who honestly were failing me their entire lives. I became a kid managing adult emotions and navigating adult consequences and conflict. From the outside, yes, it looked like I had it all. I was an all-star athlete, the perfect student. I strived, God knows, to be the perfect daughter. I thought if I could be the best, I would be lovable. But all I was doing was starving myself, both physically and emotionally, to fit into a version of myself that wasn't even mine. This story that I was living wasn't even mine. It was my parents'. And I know a lot of kids go through that. Somehow, I don't know, someone, recently asked me when I knew my parents were toxic. And you know what the funny thing is? I didn't even have to think about it. I told them that I acknowledged my parents were toxic and my family was broken when I was only 8 years old. Truthfully, I probably knew before that because of the environment that we lived in, before they even divorced. I know parents might not want to hear this, but our kids know who we really are by a young age. I definitely say by the age of 10, I did. You can't hide from them. Our children are always listening. They're always watching us. And even though we may lie to ourselves, they can see our truth. By the time I was 8, I knew that this wasn't a happy family that I was growing up in. I knew that my parents didn't have a healthy marriage, and I knew that they weren't being good parents. I knew that because of the way I felt. At that young age, I was already carrying guilt and shame. I was already feeling unlovable and unworthy. And it wasn't by material things. It was just by the way that I felt in that house, the things we didn't have. We weren't having family dinners. We weren't laughing together and having, good night story moments together. We weren't smiling and laughing and hugging. And I knew this not only by the way I felt, but just by the tiny whispers that I was saying to myself, that I didn't even know what my inner voice was at that age. But I heard it and I knew it because I felt it. And that poses a question, why do we trust the voices outside of us more than we trust the ones within us? That's a big mistake. And that whisper at 14, the one that said to me, "This isn't it, Cari, this can't be it," spoke to me throughout my entire life. Our inner voice is our compass. Your inner voice is your compass, your guide. And damn it, you have to listen to it. At 14, I faced really an impossible choice. I was terrified. I could either stay with my mother, who was physically present but emotionally absent, or I could live with a father who was physically absent and just as emotionally unavailable. I didn't have the words for it then, but what I know now, I recognize as intuition that guided me to choose the space I so desperately needed. Space for what? I wasn't sure. There was a whisper that said, "This can't be it, Cari. This isn't it." That summer, I visited my father and I never returned to live with my mother. It was terrifying and heartbreaking to say those words to her on the phone that day out loud, that I wasn't going to come home. Because in that moment, I knew that I had broken my mother's heart even more. I had to break her heart to save my own heart. And that's no decision a child should ever have to make. And then have to feel guilty for it. And in that moment, I don't even recall her asking me why. It was, "How could you?" However, that call and that choice, it was also a glimmer of control that I realized that I had. A realization that I had the power to make decisions for myself. For my mother, it was a betrayal. In her eyes, I was no longer her daughter. I was the enemy, the cause of more pain. That single decision set the stage for healing, though. Though it would also take decades, God knows it has taken me decades, to really come into healing and embrace it head on with honesty. It taught me a hard truth that sometimes survival means carving out space for yourself, even when you have no idea what to do with it yet. Looking back, I see the choices, I do. Looking back, I see the choice wasn't just about picking between two parents, two toxic narcissists. It was about navigating a world neither of them took responsibility for putting me, their child, in such an impossible position. I became a kid who had to, choose between two people who were supposed to love me the most. A kid who had to lie to judges in courts. A kid who had to play roles that I didn't even understand, trying to please the adults who treated my existence as a battleground. That experience shaped me throughout adulthood. Decades of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and emotional and physical starvation. I tried to soothe the emptiness with bulimia. And when I got old enough and lived in New York, bulimia and martinis. Pain and control were the currency, and I had to play along to stay afloat. My father made me even write bitch in the memo lines of the checks to my mother for her alimony monthly payments, not as an act of rebellion, but as a warped form of survival in a home where sometimes their cruelty with each other was just normalized. Neither of them stopped to think about what it meant for a child to be put in that position, let alone how it would shape my sense of worth or safety in the world. You know, that's the thing, is when two people who brought you into this world hate each other so much, and you start to realize don't really like themselves that much. What does that say about their child? What does that say to their child? What does that say about myself? But in that chaos, I learned to create space for myself, space that would one day become the foundations for my healing. And it was a long road. It was a long road of shame and guilt and pain and disordered eating and numbing and living this fake perfect life, pretending that I was so strong, yet I was fragile, making my pain into this armor to protect myself from anyone, because God knows I really couldn't afford any more pain or hurt or trauma. I was just really trying to survive all through my teens and my 20s. And at 31, I made another hard decision of my life. I broke up with my mother. I severed the connection that began once with the umbilical cord. It was both heartbreaking and liberating. I don't know how I can make that make sense, but it was heartbreaking and liberating at the same time. Her absence hasn't left a void, though. At first, it did feel like a void because I was grieving somebody that was still alive. But in that void, it also gave me space to rise. My estrangement with my mother became my journey to empowerment. My mother has never met my children and has never seen the family that I have fought so hard to create. She is only like a couple-hour flight away, but emotionally, she's light years from the life I live now. And the man who drank his way through my childhood, my father, is now a loving and supporting grandfather to my children. That transformation didn't happen overnight or without boundaries. I had to reparent myself first, learning to set firm limits that forced him to show up in ways I never thought imagined. I never thought could happen. He's not the dad who sat in the bleachers at my games or celebrated my milestones. But today, he's present in a way I never thought possible. It's a process of setting boundaries and letting go of expectations and making space for growth, both mine and theirs. So, here's the question I want you to ask yourself, because I had to ask myself this question a long time ago. Do you believe you're worthy? Worthy of peace, of joy, of love? Because if that answer is yes, then you have to make the choice to take action. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. And honestly, even if you don't think you're worthy, I'm going to tell you right now, you are. So even if you don't believe in yourself that you are worthy of any of those things that I'm talking about, I'm telling you, you are. You are. During my unhealed stage, I numbed myself. I buried my pain under perfectionism, under work, under studying, and the need to prove myself. I lived in those libraries in grad school for 11 hours a day. I worked 80 hours a week. I kept myself so busy. Even once I became a mother, I kept myself so busy with every parent obligation I could say yes to. I was in a constant need of proving myself for decades. I'd stay in toxic cycles because the fear of rocking the boat felt greater than the pain I was living in. But during my healing, everything shifted. For me, I turned to writing, to journaling, to gratitude. I started small practices, celebrating the tiniest wins, learning to sit with my emotions instead of running from them, this came with silence. Now, some of you might not like the word meditation, so let's not use that word. Sitting in silence, even if it's just a couple minutes every day, I could sit in silence and I could hear myself speak. I could take deep breaths. I could be at peace, and I could hear my inner voice guide me, speak to me. It's amazing what you can hear yourself say, and even what you need to hear yourself say to yourself, if you just allow yourself to hear yourself. And that comes in silence. And silence can be really scary during the beginning of all this. It can be so scary. But fear is not there to turn you away from things. Fear is your compass. It is there to tell you what you need to face. So learning to sit with my emotions instead of running from them has allowed me to build this community that has reminded me that I'm not alone, and I was never alone, and you're not alone. And here's the most beautiful thing. I've learned that freedom from guilt and shame is just a choice away. I want to say that again. The freedom from guilt and shame is just a choice away. That choice isn't easy, but it's there for you, and it's waiting. You were born with grit in your bones. Everyone that's here with me today listening, I want you to know you were born with grit in your bones. You're not here to just exist. You are here to live. You are here to blaze your own path, to rewrite the narrative that's been handed to you, whether it's been through a toxic upbringing or a life circumstance or a consequence from a choice. We can't control our upbringing or our circumstances that life throws at us, but we can control how we heal, how we grow, and how we move forward. No matter where you are in your journey, whether it's your first step or the 100th, I'm here to meet you where you are. If you are struggling, I hope you know this. You are not broken. You are becoming. I've always told myself that if I ever made it through all this pain, that my mission would be to inspire others to do the same, to make the choice to do better by choosing better. And even if it's just one person, because that one person, it could have been my mom growing up. It could have been me in my 20s living in New York City and feeling completely lost and alone. It could have been me as a pregnant mom, terrified of becoming a mother because I didn't even have my own mother to guide me or to even teach me how to be a mother. My journey has been shaped by grit and grace because there's always love. It's just buried under a lot of our pain and trauma. You know, from the back roads of West Virginia to the hustler that I was in New York City, and even the mom and woman navigating this glitzy, sometimes superficial life in Miami, I always know that my Grandma Jo, a southern star shining down from heaven, is guiding me. Because growing up, she always said to me, repeatedly, Cari, don't worry about that mule going blind. Just keep loading the wagon. And I'll never forget that. Don't worry about the mule going blind. Just keep loading the wagon. Because life is hard. It is work. But we have to keep going. So I want all of you to keep going, to keep loading the wagon and not worry about the mule going blind. So as we head into February, my birthday month, I want you to ask yourself, what do you need to let go of? What hard choices are you avoiding? And what would it look like till you finally choose yourself? And what would it look like to finally choose yourself? Remember, every hard choice you make is a trophy. It's an invisible trophy that only you can see. Setting boundaries, that's a trophy. Letting go of guilt, that's a win. Stepping into the person that you are meant to be, that you want to be, that's a win. Thank you for being here, guys, for listening, for being a part of Surviving Roots, for your DMs and your likes and your comments, and just being present in my life and part of my journey. Some of you may not realize this, but even though my healing journey began at 14 when I made that tough choice, and again at 31 when estrangement led to my empowerment, and through my suffering and through my healing and through me owning my shit, and for me turning up the volume on my voice and saying this shit out loud. I want to thank you. My hope for you is that you find your way to healing physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually so that you can live a life wholeheartedly. Nothing can hold you down. I want you to let your pain push you forward. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a message, DM me, send me an email, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know. I want to know, what's the hard choice you're ready to make? Here's to a year of healing, growth, and stepping into the life that you deserve, that you want. You've got this, and I'm cheering you on.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Surviving Roots. I hope it gave you something meaningful to carry with you. Let's keep this conversation going. Find me on Instagram at cari.fund, where I'll share more from the show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs it. And remember, we are the choices that we make.